The airdropped aid is not enough for one family. This is nothing. Egypt should open the Rafah crossing and let the trucks in normally.
Help from above. The U.S. parachutes food to the people of Gaza, but the UN warns a famine is looming, and Gazans say the airdrops are just a drop in the bucket. Welcome to Your World Tonight. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Also on the program, the new commander-in-chief of Ukraine's armed forces makes personnel changes in the face of recent losses, as Ukraine's Western allies evaluate their own positions. And
they didn't have nothing on me, not a thing.
A wrongful murder conviction in St. John finally made right. 2 men sentenced to life in prison tell CBC about the 4-decade wait to clear their names. Over the Gaza Strip, a U.S. military plane opens its rear doors, dropping pallets of food to the people below. The tens of thousands of meals are severely needed in Gaza, where the United Nations warned this week a famine is almost inevitable. The aid comes as international mediators continue to push for a temporary ceasefire and get more supplies into Gaza before the fasting month of Ramadan. Chris Reyes reports.
Thousands of meals are still suspended in the air, and already there's a mad scramble to the Mediterranean coast where they are landing. The aid dropped by U.S. military bombers into Gaza, where more than a quarter of the population is one step from famine, according to the United Nations. But even for those who so badly need it, food falling from the sky stings. Abu Talat Al Ghul has been displaced from his home. The United States is part of this crime against Gaza, he says. Today, America is trying to buy our silence by sending us aid. Medad Tahir, also displaced, says the parachute's aid is not enough for one family. This is nothing, he says. Egypt should open its crossing and let the trucks get in normally. Mossab Abu Toha was able to leave Gaza with some of his family, but he also left others behind. To him, the aid drop is also insulting.
I mean, I think this is a very ridiculous thing. I mean, you are providing Israel with weapons, and you can't even drive a food truck into the northern part of Gaza.
Some aid is entering by land, like in Gaza City, where a truck delivering flour is rushed by locals. But that kind of delivery is becoming increasingly chaotic, dangerous, and deadly. Earlier this week, the Hamas-run Ministry of Health said Israeli forces shot and killed more than 100 Palestinians as they waited for an aid delivery. Israel challenged that account and says they're investigating what happened. Israeli army spokesperson Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari says the claim that they deliberately attacked the convoy and deliberately harmed people is completely baseless. More than aid, the louder call worldwide is for a ceasefire. In a protest in Washington, D.C., Americans echo the cries of those in Gaza.
We're dropping some food and we're dropping the bombs. That's what he's got to do. Stop sending the money and the weapons.
U.S. officials say outlines of a temporary peace deal are in place and will depend on Hamas agreeing to releasing hostages. President Biden is pushing for a ceasefire deal by Ramadan, which starts around March 10th. Ceasefire negotiations are expected to resume tomorrow in Cairo. Chris Reyes, CBC News, New York.
As Israel's war against Hamas grinds on, Nicaragua is getting involved by suing Germany at the International Court of Justice. Nicaragua wants the World Court to order Germany to stop arms sales to Israel and restart funding for UNRWA. There's a word for this kind of tactic: lawfare, where lawyers, activists, and sometimes countries use legal means to stop weapons exports. As Rebecca Collard reports, this isn't the first legal case to test Germany's relationship with Israel.
Ganz wichtig, die Beihilfehandlung zu dieser Haupttat.
At a press conference in Berlin, German-Palestinian lawyer Nadia Samor outlines a criminal case she's filing against German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and senior members of his cabinet. The accusation: complicity in genocide.
Their practice of Giving permission to weapons exports to Israel is a form of aiding and abetting genocide.
With a collective of rights and legal organizations, Samor is bringing the case on behalf of German Palestinians who have family in Gaza. German weapons exports to Israel have increased almost tenfold since October, making up more than 1/4 of Israel's military imports. German officials say their country has a special responsibility toward Israel because of the Holocaust. But activists and lawyers say if German weapons are used to commit crimes in Gaza, the German government is culpable.
It will have an impact that this big word genocide is being directed towards the government, and that's why I think Germans will hold their own government also accountable because they don't want to repeat history.
The German government is currently considering more exports to Israel, including tank munitions. Nora Rageb is one of the plaintiffs. She says the Israeli military killed her aunt and uncle in Gaza in November, and she fears for her other relatives.
For me, the first goal is to end the violence, and hopefully this procedure would help so. And in the end, also to hold German officials accountable for their actions.
The case is part of a growing movement in Europe to stop arms and military equipment from being transferred to Israel.
International treaties, if you look at the Arms Trade Treaty, for instance, or if you look at EU laws on arms exports, but also the Geneva Conventions. If you know that your weapons will be used for violations of humanitarian law, then you shouldn't export those weapons.
In mid-February, a Dutch court ordered a halt to exports of fighter jet parts to Israel, citing the large number of civilian casualties and the scale of the destruction in Gaza. Dirk-Jan Joffing is with Oxfam Novib, one of the organizations which brought the case in the Netherlands after months of lobbying the government.
But unfortunately, all of those meetings were quite fruitless. So going to the court, it was really like the last option that we had in order to force the Dutch government to do the right thing.
Back in Berlin, Nora Rageb also says a lawsuit was a sort of last resort after months of protesting and trying to raise awareness about what is happening in Gaza.
It unfolds on many lines, no? It's not only the military support, it's also the political support. It's also hard to see that your government always kind of repeats that even after thousands of deaths, it stands in solidarity with Israel, and we know the government of Israel is also a right-wing government.
Spain and Italy have already stopped arms exports to Israel, and a regional government in Belgium stopped the sale of gunpowder. The case here in Germany will now be considered by the prosecutor. Rebecca Collard for CBC News, Berlin.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is hosting his Italian counterpart in Toronto today.
What a tremendous pleasure it is to welcome Prime Minister Maloney to Canada.
That's Trudeau and Giorgia Meloni at a brief photo op before private talks. Italy holds the presidency of the G7 this year, with Canada taking on the role in 2025. While Trudeau has expressed his concerns over some of Meloni's policies restricting LGBTQ rights, the two leaders are expected to discuss ways to strengthen ties and the ongoing conflicts in Gaza and Ukraine. Meanwhile, in Ukraine, the new commander-in-chief of the country's armed forces is signaling he will replace some of his top military officials. It's the latest sign of Ukraine's struggles to make progress in the war with Russia, and it comes as Western leaders struggle to keep a united front in the conflict. Mike Crawley reports.
The aftermath of a drone attack on Odessa, Ukraine's third largest city. The sniffer dog searches for people in the rubble of an apartment building. Rescuers recover 4 bodies, including an infant. With Russia making recent gains in the war, Ukraine's new commander-in-chief has just toured the front line and announced he plans to replace some of his top brass.
It's a very normal thing that you do after battles don't go the way you want them to go.
Andrew Rasoulis is a military analyst and a fellow at the Canadian Global Affairs Institute.
You've got to replace the generals that are not effective. Otherwise, you can't stabilize the line. And Ukraine is being pressed. They're in a difficult spot.
We also have Ukraine's back.
U.S. President Joe Biden meets the Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni in Washington on a tour that also brings her to Canada.
And I want to thank you, Giorgia, for Italy's unwavering support for Ukraine and your leadership of the G7.
Meloni will host her fellow G7 leaders in June.
I'm working on a concrete and substantial G7 summit. We intend first and foremost to reaffirm the rule-based international order, defending freedom and building peace for Ukraine.
Yet even within the G7, some cracks on Ukraine are showing. French President Emmanuel Macron floated the possibility this week of NATO countries getting directly involved in the war. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz shot that down immediately, saying there's no way Germany will send its troops to fight in Ukraine.
Perhaps other NATO member countries might be prepared to send at least military advisors.
Christian Leuprecht is a professor of political science at the Royal Military College of Canada and at Queen's University.
It is never helpful when the countries that claim to be supporting Ukraine and its fight and its sovereignty ultimately stand divided rather than united.
Following Macron's remarks, Russian President Vladimir Putin threatened nuclear war if NATO troops are sent to Ukraine. Leuprecht calls that saber-rattling, but potentially effective.
Putin knows exactly that with his remarks, he can divide the alliance, and that's been a strategy that has worked also very well for Putin.
Leuprecht believes Putin's message is also targeted to a domestic audience. Russia's presidential election is 2 weeks away. Mike Crawley, CBC News, Toronto.
A massive fire has destroyed a potato chip factory in New Brunswick. Flames tore through the Covered Bridge potato chips plant on Friday night, close to the town of Heartland, about 120 kilometers northwest of Fredericton. Police say between 20 to 30 employees were in the building when the fire broke out. They were all safely evacuated with no injuries. Tracy DeMerchant is Heartland's mayor.
It's just a total feeling of sadness and loss. Of course, concern for the Albright family and what this means to them, what it means to our community to have lost this employer. But we're also a very resilient and optimistic community here in Heartland. So we know that this family is not alone in facing the struggle. We will all stand behind them and support them in whatever way we can.
The factory employed around 10% of Heartland's population. The cause of the fire is under investigation. Meanwhile, the wildfires in the Texas Panhandle continue to devastate the region. Governor Greg Abbott says strong winds and high temperatures in the forecast are expected to make the fires worse this weekend.
Everybody needs to understand that we face enormous potential fire dangers. No one can let down their guard. Everyone must remain very vigilant. Winds are going to pick back up. The right elements for a fire will be around.
The Smokehouse Creek fire is the largest wildfire in the state's history since it began on Monday. It has killed at least 2 people. It's also destroyed at least 500 structures and burned through more than 400,000 hectares. In Haiti, gunfights rage across the capital, Port-au-Prince. Violent clashes between police and gangs in the city surged this week, killing at least 4 police officers. It comes as Prime Minister Ariel Henry visited Kenya to sign a security deal. That deal could fast-track a plan to send 1,000 police officers to lead a UN-backed mission aimed at tackling gang violence. Haiti has dealt with waves of violence since the assassination of President Jovenel Moïse in 2021. The UN estimates at least 300,000 people have been forced to flee. Still ahead, in Manitoba's Bible Belt, pastors are trying to prove that faith and science can go hand in hand. We'll tell you about their message to parishioners in the face of increasing droughts. That's coming up on Your World Tonight. For 1 month each year, students in Canada learn about the stories of Black Canadians and their contributions to our country's history. Only one province, Ontario, has made teaching that history mandatory. Academics and teachers want other provinces to do the same, but say such mandates should come with deeper, long-term commitments. Deanna Sumanak-Johnson reports.
For this group of students in Surrey, BC, Black History Month ended, but learning about achievements of Black Canadians won't stop. A big deal for students like Bullen Kosa.
I kind of wanted to take Black studies to expand my knowledge of the positive contributions Black people had on our society.
That's thanks to his teacher, Melanie Schur, who saw a gap and, together with 2 colleagues, helped design a Black Studies course for her students.
There was an Asian Studies course, there was a BC First Peoples course, there was 20th Century World History, Genocide Studies, Philosophy, And then there was no Black studies. And Black peoples have been on these lands, these indigenous lands, for over 400 years.
Starting in 2025, that kind of learning will be mandatory for Ontario students in grades 7, 8, and 10. When that announcement was made last month, it stirred up reactions across the country.
And I hope that other provinces are inspired.
Dalhousie University professor Afua Cooper is one of Canada's preeminent experts on Black history. She says the move by Ontario is commendable, but adds, as both a parent and a scholar, she has seen firsthand that some teachers may be disinterested, others even opposed to learning about Black Canadian history.
Will teachers be trained? Will the resources be provided for teachers? Are you going to bring all the various teachers' organizations and unions and associations and school boards to the table and say, hey, how are we going to do this?
Toronto teacher D. Tyler Robinson says the mandate is a step in the right direction, but says it doesn't get to kids early enough.
The research is telling us that we need to begin educating against this and to improve the way young people see the world also at age 3. So waiting till grade 7, that's far too late.
Robinson also wonders why Ontario's announcement didn't build upon existing courses built by Black educators, like the elective course he created for the Toronto District School Board.
This shiny new plan that's just in time for Black History Month that really feels like trying to score political points instead of really getting at the heart and the root of the matter.
His criticism gets at some of the issues with education mandates. University of Ottawa education professor Joel Westheimer says mandates can be tricky in other ways.
The political goal is fulfilled by issuing a mandate that's going to happen as soon as possible. But educationally, of course, we need time, and teachers have a curriculum that's already jam-packed with stuff.
Still, over in BC, teacher Melanie Schuer hopes her province heeds Ontario's example.
And that gave me encouragement and impetus that this could happen in the province I teach in, and this could be something that is nationwide.
Something she believes would send a strong message to all students that Black history matters well after February is over. Deanna Sumanak-Johnson, CBC News, Toronto.
Well, when they said not guilty, I never got the feeling that I really want it, because I know it's overshadowed by cancer, them dying.
For 76-year-old Robert Mailman, his recent acquittal for a crime he did not commit is a hollow victory. Mailman, along with Walter Gillespie, spent years in prison, convicted in the 1983 murder of George Lehman, whose partially burned body was found in a St. John park. The government of New Brunswick has now reached a settlement with the two men. Nick Purdon tells us about the flawed case against Mailman and Gillespie and their decades-long fight to clear their names.
They didn't have nothing on me, not a thing.
That's Walter Gillespie. He's 80 years old now, but he'll never forget when he was arrested back in 1983 and charged with second-degree murder. The police said they had eyewitnesses. Gillespie says once he was in custody, an officer tried to get him to pin the murder on Robert Mailman.
He got me in the office all by himself. He wanted me to make a statement against Robert Mailman. And I said, no, I'm not making no statement. He said, you want to protect him? He said, you go down with him. And that's what happened.
Robert Mailman was charged anyway, and both men were convicted and sentenced to life in prison. They always maintained their innocence, and Mailman remembers how he survived his years in jail.
The only thing kept me going for the first 10 years was probably revenge. Not to get out to hurt anybody, but just to make them held accountable.
In prison, they never stopped fighting to get out. They even held poker games and used the winnings to hire private investigators. Eventually, Innocence Canada, a non-profit organization that fights for the wrongfully accused, took up their case. Lawyer Jerome Kennedy remembers the first call he ever got from Robert Mailman.
Bobby, he wouldn't shut up about being innocent. It's an example of a man saying, I am innocent and no one is listening to me. Will you please help?
Looking at the case, Kennedy says it was clear the police targeted Mailman.
Bobby Mailman was a notorious alleged criminal back in the early 80s in St. John. And essentially, they started the investigation with the view that Bobby Mailman was the killer. Now we have to find the evidence to support that.
It was lawyer Bhavin Sodhi who found the most damning example of how the police targeted Mailman and Gillespie. In 2019, she uncovered a file folder filled with evidence.
We're flipping through these pieces of paper, and when I looked down, I said, are these receipts of payments? There's no way that the police would keep a ledger of hundreds of dollars of payments made to John Lohman Jr., one of the key witnesses that testified against Robert Mailman and Gillespie.
So you found proof that the police had been paying the main witness that put the two gentlemen away?
Yes.
Even though there was so much evidence pointing to a wrongful conviction, Robert Mailman spent 18 years in prison, and Walter Gillespie 21. And it took until January 4th, 2024 to clear their names.
Well, he's my brother now. I mean, we've been together for 40 years fighting this. We were hoping to grab our arms and put them up, but I couldn't lift my arm after we come out of the courtroom. I was so exhausted.
Nick Purdon, CBC News, St. John.
And you can watch a longer version of Nick's story on the National's YouTube page. You are listening to Your World Tonight from CBC News. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. You can hear Your World Tonight and other CBC radio programs wherever you are on your favorite podcast app. In the heart of Manitoba's Bible Belt, a dry winter has led to moderate drought, and it's not the first time. Officials blame it on climate change, and a group of faith leaders is finding ways to discuss that with parishioners, despite any skepticism. Riley Lachuk reports.
We may have all kinds of doubts about climate change.
It's a topic not off limits inside this Southern Manitoba United Church. Reverend Carrie Martins.
Whatever doubts I had about humanity's impact on our planet died when I saw those before and after images of the oil sands.
Martins and other faith leaders hope the need to change is a message that resonates with their parishioners. Lake Minnewaska, where the city gets its drinking water from, is about 1.5 meters lower than it should be. So the city is asking residents to conserve water. Mayor Nancy Penner doesn't shy away from blaming climate change.
Major events happen overnight, and we're seeing those extremes. Where Morden is situated in the middle of the continent, we are situated for those extreme climate events just because of our geographic location.
Morden is in the heart of Manitoba's Bible Belt, a region where the majority of people are Christian, and some churches played a role in challenging public health restrictions and vaccine mandates during the pandemic. Faith leaders like Martin say they hope their influence can help convert skeptics.
Faith and life in the world and faith and science don't have to be at odds with each other.
Sandy Plett is the Climate Action Coordinator at Mennonite Church Canada and speaks with congregations across the country.
Churches actually are built communities. Like, what better place to start doing action?
Plett and Martins have helped form a new local group called the Pembina Climate Action Network. And while it was born out of their faith and their churches, both say this is supposed to be a community solution.
I have children, they're teenagers. I want them to see that their parents and their parents' generation took this seriously.
Earl Dick has lived in Morden for 9 years. He says he's on board.
And I think there's also a little bit of fear in a community like this about what's happening to the environment, and together we can do a good job.
Plett says while there are still doubters, there are ways to address the climate crisis without inflaming tensions.
If it's polarizing to say climate change, talk about love, talk about the vulnerable, talk about being thirsty, talk about gardens. But yeah, church leaders do have a ton of influence.
Plett and Martins hope the new Climate Action Group can not only brainstorm solutions, but connect the community. Penner says what her city really needs is another water reservoir and the money to build it. Riley Lachuk, CBC News, Morden, Manitoba.
Germany's River Ruhr is now a river renewed. It's a major waterway in the region, partly used for drinking water and at one time a popular swimming destination. But it runs through Germany's industrial heartland, and it was full of extreme pollution. Now, after years of effort, the situation is very different. Natalie Carney tells us how it was done.
The Ruhr Valley in the state of North Rhine-Westphalia is home to nearly 3,000 square kilometers of industry. But for decades, much of that industry's waste was dumped into nearby lakes and rivers, including the Ruhr, a 220-kilometer waterway from which the region gets its name.
We had a huge amount of coal mining, caulking facilities, steel manufacturers, so biological treatment was not really possible.
Norbert Yarden is the CEO of Riverband, an organization responsible for the water management in the catchment area of the River Ruhr, which nearly 5 million people rely on for drinking water. At its worst, he says, levels of chemical pollution, including phosphorus, ammonia, and heavy metal deposits, were so high, authorities banned swimming in the river.
So in the first half of the last century, swimming was very popular, irregardless of the pollution at that time. But due to the increasing pollution, the authorities in 1973 forbid to further swim in the River Ruhr.
Eventually, some of the polluting factories were closed, while reservoirs and water treatment plants were built. But the launch of the Safe Ruhr project in 2012 really started to make an impact.
We investigated all hygienic parameters which are critical with regard to swimming in a surface water. But the very special feature of this project was that we included from the first day all affected or interested stakeholders.
This included the public, fishers, environmental organizations, and even water rescue teams.
We also discussed very intensively what are the expectations of the public to swim again in the River Ruhr, what is possible, and what are the factors affecting the quality of the River Ruhr.
A final report was presented to authorities in 2016.
In May 2017, more than 40 years after it has been forbidden to swim in the River Ruhr, swimming was again officially allowed.
Today, there are now 3 official swimming sites along the Ruhr River. But the project has also opened up other water activities too, says local resident Daniel Kaiser, who spends every free minute he can fishing at Lake Baldenei.
The water's now very clear. You can see the bottom of the lake in many places. There are always so many people here with paddle boards on the water, and every few meters you meet sailors and anglers.
The Safe Ruhr project has helped change the view many have had of the valley, from an industrial wasteland to an environmental role model. Natalie Carney for CBC News in Essen, Germany.
Canada's own Tate McRae there. The 20-year-old from Calgary is at the O2 Arena in London tonight, where she's made her debut performance with this song, Greedy, at the Brit Awards. Other performers included Dua Lipa, who opened the show with her new track, Training Season, and won for Best Pop Act. There was also Ray, whose haul for the night includes Artist, Best New Artist, and Song of the Year for Escapism.
Sleezing and teasing, I'm sitting on them. All of my diamonds are dripping on them. I met him at the bar.
And also Kylie Minogue, who closed the show and was presented with the Brit Awards' highest accolade, the Global Icon Award. On the red carpet, she reflected on her nearly 40-year career to Sky News.
It's been a career but a lifetime of just chipping away and learning the craft, and I think that would be that's an achievement I'm really proud of.
You look like fun to me. You look a little like somebody I know.
We'll leave you with one of Kylie Minogue's most recent hits. This is Padam Padam on Your World Tonight. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Thanks for listening.
I got the shivers when I look into your eyes, and I can tell